Glad to see you. Everybody's waving at me. Okay, good. So, let's turn in your All-American hymnal to number 143. 143. I'm anchored in Jesus. Let's just sing the first verse. 143. Upon life's boundless ocean where mighty billows roll, I've fixed my hope in Jesus, the blesser of my soul. When trials fierce assail me as storms are gathering o'er, I rest upon His mercy and trust Him more. I've anchored in Jesus, the storms of life I'll brave. I've anchored in Jesus, I fear no wind or wave. I've anchored in Jesus, for He hath power to save. I've anchored to the rock of ages. Brother Jim, would you open us? Amen. Thank you. So Luke chapter 21. We're working our way through the chapter. We're up to verse 16. We're going to do 16 to 24 today. That's the plan. If the rapture doesn't happen in the middle of it, you never know. So starting with verse 16, chapter 21, and ye shall be betrayed by parents and brethren and kinsfolks and friends and sons, and some of you shall they cause to be put to death. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. For there shall not an hair of your head perish, and your patience possess ye your souls. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So last Sunday we saw Jesus share that great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences would dominate the scene in the last days, which means during the Great Tribulation. And there's going to be fearful sights and wonders and signs. And during this time, believers will be persecuted and put in prison and will stand before kings and rulers for Jesus' sake. Whatever happens, the Christian must stand firm in his or her faith to the end, because it is a testimony of our belief to others and to God Himself. We don't need to prepare what we would say to a ruler in advance, or to a judge, or to a prisoner guard, or whatever, because the Holy Spirit will show us what to say. And I believe this is true for us today as well, even before the Great Tribulation. But trust in the Lord, and He will show the way, no matter what tense situation we find ourselves in the midst of. Today, we'll continue looking at the signs of the last days. But first, memory verse for the week, John 3:4, which says, Nicodemus saith unto him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter the second time into his mother's womb and be born? Jesus had just told Nicodemus, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. So this was Nicodemus' response. He was confused. Doesn't make sense. How can you be born again? You know, he's an older man now. And his questions seemed reasonable, rational, and at least from a man's perspective. But Jesus was speaking of a spiritual matter, which he would explain as the verses continue. So we'll leave it at that for today. So at Luke 21:16, Jesus continued speaking, and he said, "And ye shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolks and friends, and some of you shall they cause to be put to death." These are signs of the end of the times of the Gentiles. These things have happened in the past, and they're probably happening today, but it will be a widespread kind of thing in the last days. Why will these things occur? I think partly because believers will be persecuted, but also because of famines and pestilences and earthquakes that we talked about last week. When people are hungry and suffering from disease, and they lost their homes because of the earthquakes, and so on and on and on, they tend to strike out at anyone, including family and friends, especially if you're standing for Christ. And they say, you know, this is their typical thing is, why would God let that happen? Well, get a clue. You know, but it gives you an opportunity to explain why by going back to the garden and how sin entered into the world, and God's judgment is come at this point. If you're saved, you can respond that way. But perhaps the Antichrist will offer food, shelter, and medicine to those who turn in the Christians to the authorities. I don't know. But this will be much, much worse betrayal than what a dog feels when you leave him behind. Just thought I'd add that in for a little humor in a deep subject. So the Bible actually speaks to this issue a number of times. For example, at Luke 12:51-53, Jesus said it this way, "Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth? Nay, I tell you, nay, but rather division. For from henceforth there shall be 5 in one house divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. The father shall be divided against the son, and the son against the father, the mother against the daughter against the mother, mother-in-law against the daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law." So why is this? Because God expects every person who is old enough to make his own decision for or against Christ, according to the manner explained in Scriptures. Everybody's on their own. They can't inherit it. They can't have it rubbed off on them. In other words, without the additions and subtractions and embellishments made up by false religions. Those who understand the correct way will end up with Christ for eternity. Those who make the wrong choice or choices will spend eternity with Satan. It's that simple. And this has caused much division among family and friends all around the world since Jesus said this. So this goes back, this is not just end time stuff here. This is going way back, you know, the first century. So Jesus said, from henceforth, first 3 words of that verse. So from that time on is what that means. But in the last days, it will involve more than just disagreement. It will mean the wrong-headed people turning in true believers over to the ruling authorities to be killed. In the Old Testament, at Micah 7:6, similar thing. It says, "For the son dishonoreth the father, the daughter rises up against her mother, the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house." In this case, Micah was lamenting or grieving over to God. He was lamenting to God over the sins of Israel. And we could look at the whole chapter or the whole book of Micah, but the idea is that things had gotten so bad in Israel during Micah's time that even family turned against one another, as did friends and neighbors and children. They were enemies to one another. And that's how it's going to be in the last days. It's just going to be multitudes worse. You think it's bad now. So the most similar passages to Luke here that we just read are at Luke 10, 21 to 20, verse 21 and verse 35. And these verses correspond to what Jesus was speaking about that day in Luke 21, but they're taught at a different time in his ministry. And that's pretty clear if you compare it. We're not going to do all that. But this is another evidence that Jesus taught the same lessons throughout his ministry over and over and over again. He changed the wording sometimes, but he did that. But the verses say this, and the brother shall deliver up the brother to death, the father the child, and the children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. So this sort of thing has happened all through history. But most of the time it involves unbelievers influencing the rulers to kill believers and their family, and not the other way around. It also involves unbelievers delivering unbelieving family members up to death to any authority, including religious leaders of false religions. But you don't see really any, or hardly any, depending on how you look at it, real believers delivering up false believers. That's interesting, isn't it? Just don't see it. But it's going to be particularly bad during the Great Tribulation. So Luke 21:17 says this, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. If all men hate certain people for Christ's sake, then that means that all men who are not standing for Christ are unbelievers, and which seems to point to the Great Tribulation. Who are the key influencers for Christ during the Great Tribulation? That would be the 144,000 witnesses as called out in Revelation 7:4, Revelation 14:1, and verse 3. They're redeemed young men who were without fault. The Bible says they will be the first fruits unto God and the Lamb during the Great Tribulation. These men will be specifically hated by all men for Christ's sake. These men are all virgins, and they're all Jews, contrary to what people say. It's in the Bible. They're all Jews. From the 12 tribes of Israel, there are no non-Jews in the 144,000. The 144,000 will be found to have no guile. You know what that means? That means they never lie and they never deceive. There are some who claim the 144,000 are something else. I challenge them to read the Bible and to see for themselves from God's inspired word who they really are. It's not that hard to figure this out. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to see it either. Luke 21:18 says, but there shall not an hair of your head perish. That means God will protect these particular 144,000 Jewish men. This is supported by the fact that Revelation 14:1 says the 144,000 will have God the Father's name written on their foreheads, which is an indication of protection. God will protect them, at least for a time. Revelation 7 goes through the 12 tribes, and it shows that the 12,000, 12 times 12 being 144, 12,000 times 12,000 not 12,000 times 12,000, 12,000 plus 12,000 plus 12,000 times 12, 12,000 times 12 is 140,000, 144,000. And so they're going to be, each tribe will be sealed by God. And this is another proof that God will be protecting these men as witnesses as they witness to the lost during the Great Tribulation. Not one single hair of their heads will perish. Not one single hair. Wow. However, many believers will be murdered, and it's likely that in the end, God will allow the 144,000 to be martyred. Many scholars think this. I don't think it's absolutely proven, but God will allow the 144,000 to be martyred, which means murdered, when their time of witnessing is complete. So Jesus counseled believers in that day to, in your patience, possess ye your souls. What does that mean? The world will be collapsing all around during that time, during the Great Tribulation, and the fierce persecution will be occurring. The word translated as patience here in this verse has the sense of being steadfast or enduring or persisting through these troubling times where all these earthquakes and famines and pestilences and the water turns to blood and it just goes on and on and on. Everything's falling apart. The greater idea here is that believers are to endure the tribulation and the persecution with a calm assurance while keeping their eyes on Jesus. God is in control, and Jesus will be about to return at the very end of the tribulation. The same message applies to us today, by the way. Our persecution and troubles are not near as bad as they will be for the people during the Great Tribulation. We like to complain about this, that, and other. I'll be first in line for that. But it's not going to be even remotely close to what we experience today. We're to persevere through whatever challenges we have in our lives until the end of our lives or until the rapture. Now, the rapture means when it comes, we're snatched up by Jesus. He comes in the clouds, but he doesn't touch down on the earth. So that we're gone at that point. We don't have to go through the Great Tribulation. Those saved after the rapture will have to put up with it. But if we die physical lives before the rapture, then we get to be in heaven with Jesus. And then we get to return with him when he returns to earth at the end of the Great Tribulation and to observe what he does, which is going to be to annihilate the Antichrist and all his armies. So we're to pray for help today at our age and to seek to find contentedness and even joy in the midst of whatever suffering or unfair things show up in our lives. Mark 13:13 adds the words to the same context we're examining here at Luke 21, and it says, "And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved." We're to endure to the end if we're in the Great Tribulation. But we're to endure to the rapture or until physical death if we don't make it to the rapture today. Keeping our eyes on Jesus. Jesus shifted gears just a little bit at Luke 21:20, saying, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh." The context of the verse, again, is during the Great Tribulation, which is still in the future from today. But some scholars apply this verse to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, which is, 1900 and something years ago. So, which I can certainly see if one isolates the verse on its own. But when you examine the passage and the entire context of the whole chapter, the verses especially after this one, it's easy to see that this is an event that has never occurred in history. Some scholars view this verse as reflective of the invasion of Russia into Jerusalem in the middle of the tribulation, as predicted in Ezekiel 38 and 39, or at least an invasion from a northern country, because it doesn't say Russia per se. But if this verse in Luke refers to invasion from the north, as referred to in Ezekiel, it's likely near the midpoint of the Great Tribulation. Other scholars think that Luke 21:20 refers to the last days of the Great Tribulation, but whatever the timing, it's clear that Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies. That's what compassed means, around a compass. So Luke 21:21, Jesus said, "Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them which are in the countries enter thereinto." So Jesus' instructions to the Jews of that day are written down for anyone who reads the Scriptures in that day, during that period of time, during the Great Tribulation. Those in Judea are to flee away to the mountains to hide out and see as they see these events playing out. That's what they're supposed to do. It's a time when the wrath of the devil and the beast of Revelation will be poured out upon Israel, that all things which are written may be fulfilled, which is what Luke 21:22 says. The next verse. Reading the entire verse, it says, "For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled," that they're going to come to pass. So God had said back in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 35, "To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste." So this entire event is cited by Jesus in Luke 21 as God's vengeance upon those who have refused him. Paul quoted God at Romans 12:19, which he said, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." Isaiah 63:4 says, "For the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed is come." The context of this Isaiah 63 is about Jesus' second coming. And because of the words here, that day of vengeance correlates with the year of God's redeemed, which I think is a pretty good argument for this passage. Could refer to the very last days of the tribulation. But I'm going to say it's not here in a minute, so bear with me. And it's not an invasion during the middle of the tribulation, but it probably refers to the entire second half of the tribulation in general. So, but an excellent argument for the need to flee to the mountains is in the middle of the tribulation is found at Matthew 24. Let's go there. Matthew 24. Hold your place in Luke and go back to Matthew 24, verse 15. And we'll read a few verses here. Matthew 24:15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. And then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down and take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight not be in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation. There it is, those words, great tribulation. Such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time. No, nor ever shall be. So the language is similar to what we're looking at in Luke 21, but this passage has more information than Luke has. The reason to place this at the middle of the tribulation is because of the call out of seeing the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. An abomination is a detestable thing to God, and it ought to be to mankind as well. It's typically an idol, but it can be any detested thing. Desolation means to cause ruin unto oneself in an appalling manner. Did you get that? To cause ruin to oneself. I find that kind of amusing because I didn't know that was the definition of desolation. But this Antichrist is going to ruin himself. He just doesn't know it, and yet he does. So it's kind of amusing, really. But it's going to stun the world. It's going to cause horror. The people of that day will be amazed at whatever this is. I think it will likely be something about proclaiming Satan to be God or himself or a symbol of that or something like that. The abomination of desolation is cited in one place at Daniel 11:31, and it says, "And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. They're going to place this, whatever it is, there, the abomination that makes desolate. The location appears to be the temple in Jerusalem because of the language. Now go with me to Daniel chapter 9, and we'll read three verses here. Just go, I'm going the wrong way. Daniel's right after Ezekiel, if that helps. Daniel chapter 9, and we're going to go to verse 24 through 27. So the passage says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression. This is Gabriel, the angel, the messenger, talking to Daniel, revealing to him this information. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, that's the Jews, and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make a reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. Literally, in Hebrew, it's 7 sevens. And 62 weeks. That's 62 weeks, or 62 sevens. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, or 1 7. In the midst of the week or 7, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So a week represents 7 years. 7 weeks means 490 years. The 7 weeks in Daniel 9:25 is 49 years. 7 weeks, 7 times 7. So, which is the time from the command to rebuild the temple to when it was completed. The 62 weeks in verse 26 is 434 years. The Bible doesn't tell you that part, but I did the multiplication for you. So 434 years. And that is when the Messiah will be cut off or crucified. The word literally means in Hebrew, killed. Then you have 434 years plus 49 years equals 483 years. What was the first number I gave? 490, right? That's the total period here. So that's until the consummation, as called out in verse 27. 490 years to the consummation. That means the end. So you have 490 minus 483 is 7. We have 7 more years that have not been completed. Those 7 years are representative of the Great Tribulation, which has yet to occur. So we have this interim period, which is the time of the Gentiles in between, which was a surprise to everybody. It's a mystery of the whole Bible, you know. This allowed the Gentiles to come in and have an opportunity to be saved. Of course, time of the Gentiles means the Gentiles are ruling the world is what it really means. And these are typically not saved people, but there you have it. Okay, so according to verse 27, the prince, who's the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with Israel for 7 years. But that's the Great Tribulation. But in the middle of the week, or the 7 years, which is at 3.5 years, the Antichrist will stop the Jewish sacrifices in the temple, and the honoring of God will stop. He will then overspread abominations, that's in verse 27, overspread abominations in the temple to make it desolate, meaning that it will be wasted or ruined. in an amazing way. It will remain this way until the consummation, that is to the end, which I take to mean the end of the Great Tribulation, because that's the end of the 490 years. And it's also a few days away from when, can't remember how many days, so it might be 2 or 3 months until the millennial age starts. So that's 1,000 years. But this is the end of an era, the end of the time of the Gentiles is what it amounts to. So during the Great Tribulation, Christ will pour out his wrath upon those opposed to him, and he will either make the irreparable temple repaired or he will build a new temple, which is what I think he's going to do. But the point is that the timing of the abomination of desolation is at the midpoint of the tribulation. We could see that from this passage. Not at the end. So the timeline shown on the slide, is accurate. We have 7 years. Middle of it, we have the abomination of desolation, supporting scriptures for that. The rapture, the person who made this chart says, starts on the first day or the day before the 7-year Great Tribulation. Most scholars think this. It's probably right. But that can't be proven. That can't be proven to be absolutely true. It could be the next day or the day before. It could be a week before, a year before or after. Okay? It's possible. But there's a good case that this is it. This right here. So we want to be ready for the rapture that are alive today, because it's going to be before this stuff. And this is where the really bad stuff happens in the red. Most of the judgments are in this period. So we don't want to be there if we can help it. The only way to avoid that is to get saved. Luke 21:23 states, "But woe unto them that are with child, and to get them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people." So what that means is grief will come upon the women who are either expecting babies or nursing babies. They're still nursing their babies. They're 1 year old or whatever. But the point is that when put together with the previous verses, they're being warned to get to the mountains as fast as possible. Do not delay. Don't track down family members and friends to say goodbye or to try to convince them to come with you. You're on your own. Get out now. Expectant mothers and mothers with babies typically cannot move very fast. They may not be able to get to the mountains in time. That's why this is called out. So get going. They might not be able to climb up a mountain. However, I did find one woman here on the internet. She's a Jew, and she ran in a marathon in 2017. There she is running. You can believe that. She's 7 months pregnant. She was at the time, not today. 7 months pregnant, running a marathon, 26 miles. Just amazing. So she would be the exception. Okay. But during the Great Tribulation, there was going to be great, great, great distress upon the whole earth, all the land, with all the earthquakes and volcanoes and tsunamis and pestilences and diseases and bloody water everywhere in the oceans and in the lakes and the rivers. What are you going to drink, And then the famines and other things for the last 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. So Matthew 24:17 through 18 and 20 adds that they should pray during that day that the abomination of desolation not take place in the winter when traveling is difficult. Are you going to slide on the ice while you're trying to get away? Or on the Sabbath when traveling is not allowed for Jews. Not only that, the fleeing people should not return to their houses to retrieve anything. This is not in Luke, it's in Matthew. They should not grab some food for the journey. They shouldn't grab money or extra clothes or medicine or anything else, or say, I need to get this one thing, one more thing. I need to get my little teddy bear. No, don't do it. Move on. They should flee immediately. Don't be like Lot's wife and linger. Even Lot lingered, actually. But Lot's wife looked back. So Luke 21:24 states, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive unto all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." Again, the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled is at the end of the Great Tribulation. This seems to point to the midpoint of the tribulation as well, because if it were the end of the tribulations, the Gentiles wouldn't be trodden down anything, because that's when Jesus comes back and he's going to wipe them out. When Jesus returns and utterly destroys all of his enemies, that's when that happens. So the verse also applies to the times, implies that the times of the Gentiles was not yet over, because they're going to be sending the Jews, they'll be led away captive into all nations. That's not going to happen at the end of the tribulation. That's going to happen at the midpoint of the tribulation. So they're going to be taken captive and moved out. So that means many are going to die by the sword, according to this verse, between the midpoint of the tribulation and the end of the tribulation. Not only that, many Jews will be led away as captives to be distributed amongst the Gentile nations until the actual return of Christ. Matthew 24:21 tells us, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor shall ever be." I already read that. That means that the great tribulation will be the worst ever. Nothing like it will have ever been seen before or will come to pass afterwards. The word tribulation is indicative of trouble, affliction, anguish, persecution, and distress, like nothing anybody's ever seen. You think you're having a bad day today, last week, last month, or your whole life's a bad day these days, or maybe it is next week? Think again. We're blessed. The peoples of this world will be pressed from all sorts of troubles. Mark 13:19 says it like this, "For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created unto this time. Neither shall be." If you read the whole book of Revelation, you're going to get blessed by the way, but it's a lot of trouble that's going on here. You'll begin to see the idea about how bad it is going to be for people who are alive during that day. And that's just Revelation. There's many other parts there you can find out about it. So like what we're reading today, for example. So Matthew 24:22 adds this comment to this section. It says, "And except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened." In other words, God doesn't stop if God doesn't stop the events after 3.5 years, which is the length of the second half of the Great Tribulation, no person would survive. The entire planet of people would be destroyed. But God will stop his judgment of physical people on earth for the sake of the saved 3.5 years after the abomination of desolation at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation. And at that point, the remaining surviving Jews will all be saved because they will finally call on Christ. I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to cite the verses. At that point, a few months later, Christ will set up the millennial kingdom, and he will rule all the peoples of earth with an iron scepter for 1,000 years, which means with a strong hand. Nobody's going to get away with anything anymore. You're not going to lie and get away with it. You're not going to say, "Well, I didn't kill anybody. I didn't steal anything. I didn't, whatever." Go through all the commandments in the Bible. So during this time, the wild animals will be at peace with one another. The Bible says the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and they will feed together in Isaiah 11 and Isaiah 65. I'm not citing the verse, just the chapter. But these passages mention the lion eating straw rather than the flesh. The slide here might be accurate, but I just want to point this out. It's not directly supported by Scripture. Nowhere in Scripture does it say the lamb will lay down with the lion or vice versa. It's the wolf will lay down with the lamb. But I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of this type of painting or artwork my whole life. It's the lion and the lamb. And you go, wow, why do they do that? Well, I don't know, but there you have it. And I'm not offended by it really, because I think if the wolf is at peace with the lamb, the lion is likely to be at peace with the lamb as well. But it's just not biblically accurate technically. I don't think this is a particularly important doctrinal deception, but there it is, So just letting you know. So let's close in prayer. Brother Nick, would you close us in prayer?